Welcome to the Geek 101 podcast. Road to Arrowverse Crisis, Episode 10. Supergirl, Season 3, Legends of Tomorrow, Season 3. I'm your host, Andy Bowman, and with me as always are special guests, Tessa and Sam. How you guys doing today?
Pretty good, making it.
Yep.
Through these dark, cold days.
Oh, come on. That's the best part of this time of year is getting dark early, right? It's pitch black at 6 o'clock here. It's great.
Getting to drink your beer and watch your shows instead of going outside.
Yeah,
Yes.
Exactly. But let's go ahead and jump right into this. Supergirl Season 3. What did you two think of Supergirl Season 3 overall?
Overall, I would say the season arc is very forgettable. I think we all, before we started recording, talked about how we couldn't really remember until we reminded ourselves what the season arc for Season 3 was. But character-wise, I think that the characters really start to... Some of the characters that we'd barely seen before start to come into their own. We get some pretty solid character arcs for Kara, for Mon-El, for some of the other... For Alex and Maggie, some of these other characters that we've been watching for a while. So I would definitely say the strength of Supergirl, especially this season, is in its character development. Maybe the season-long arc is a little weaker than the previous season. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't like Rain. The villain is just kind of boring.
I like Sam, though. Like,
yes.
Rain's alter ego.
Yeah.
Like, I like her as a character, and I like Ruby, which I'm not usually a fan of, like, precocious children in television. but I like Ruby and Sam. But I really don't like Rain either.
Yeah, I remember. I read a recap yesterday of the season 3 finale, and they're talking about the person who plays Sam and Rain, Odette Annable, then saying she was the best part of season 3. We hope she's back for season 4. Oh well.
Immediately is gone.
Well, she was a good addition, and as I was reviewing for this episode, I remembered Rain as the villain and that I didn't really care for that story at all, but I realized I had compartmentalized the main story of this season in favor of thinking about the character development, which I really did like, but I compartmentalized it so much I literally forgot that Kara's mother is still alive. That's how much that was put away. And by the way, I mean, it's not like it really comes up a whole lot after that.
Right. Well, I think part of it, too, is that this season, the stuff with Rain is a very slow burn. For the majority of the beginning of this season, we don't even really get that much interaction between Supergirl and Rain until after the crossover. So it's just most of the season we just keep getting teases of Rain, because Sam is introduced as a character, a single mom. Near the beginning of the season, she ends up taking over Elcor. It's called Elcor now, right? Because Lena decides to take an active role in running Catco, and so she sort of temporarily takes over the company as Lena's replacement as its CFO. But then that's all, and she becomes a really good friend of Kara and Lena. And she's a great character, but then we just keep these little glimpses of Rain, this indication that there's something going on with her, that there's an alternate personality, that sort of shows itself occasionally. We think maybe she has powers because she ends up getting in these situations where she should be hurt and she's not hurt, but nothing ever actually happens until after the crossover. And so I think that part of the problem is that we don't even get to see her as a villain until later in the season.
Yeah, on my wish list of things that happen on the DC shows post-Crisis, and it's really because of this season of Supergirl and the next season of Flash that we'll talk about, is no more season-long arcs. They don't... If the season's going to be 22 episodes, they don't have... These storylines don't have the stamina to go a whole season. Pre-crossover, post-crossover seems to be the sweet spot if you're going to do full seasons. And I'm not sold on full seasons post-crisis either, but that's been something Tessa and I have been talking about for a couple of years now.
Well, one thing about this season of Supergirl like kind of relies on people knowing Supergirl mythology
I could see
a
that.
little bit more.
Yeah.
The way it teases the villain and the way everything lines up, it seems to assume that you know what these things mean. So it feels a little bit more for the fans, which is great. I'm just not very familiar with the world killers with and those kinds of villains.
And I think it's a little bit this is where I started to feel like Supergirl suffered in the same way that earlier seasons of Flash suffered, in that, like, with how we all when we got to season 4 of Flash, we were all like, finally a villain that's not a speedster. I feel like season 3 of Supergirl starts to get into, like, okay, can we just get past the Kryptonian villains? Like, can we just get past, like, the villains that lived in the same solar system as Krypton that want to come and wreak their revenge on Kara, or terraform the Earth into some new Krypton or some new whatever. Like, I think the other thing is that this does suffer from repetition as well. It becomes like, okay, can we just have a different kind of villain now? So maybe if they had taken a break and then come back to Reign, I would have maybe enjoyed it better.
Another problem here is CBS kind of burnt most of the Superman villains real early on. The exception being Lex, who we'll talk about next season. But they really burnt through most of the interesting Superman villains. So
we still have. I think it's interesting the introduction of Brainy this season. I wonder if we'll ever actually see Brainiac.
They've teased him.
Right.
They in fact teased him this season.
Yes.
When Brainy says, like, somebody's killing all the other AI or whatever. So yeah, I do kind of wonder, like, that to me is more interesting than Reign. Like, I would take a whole season where Brainiac is the villain. But
is this one of those Smallville did it things, and we're not going to go back to it?
Right. Wasn't Smallville Brainiac played by James Marsters?
Yes,
he
that is
was?
right. I had forgotten about that. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
He'll always be Cyclops to me.
No, Marsters. Spike.
Oh,
Spike.
Oh, Spike. Oh, okay. I didn't hear you correctly. Okay, he'll always be Spike to me.
He was when he was on Smallville too. Like,
Fair
that
enough.
was a really weird headcanon for me.
Well, I mean, since it was kind of a hologram version of Brainiac, like, you just have to assume that Brainiac bumped into Spike at some point and just decided to copy him.
He was going for Billy Idol and ended up with Spike instead. So.
Actually, Billy Idol, never mind.
He had a budget Billy Idol costume.
But I think we also get a lot about grief this season, and that to me was way more interesting than Reign.
Oh yes.
It's good that these characters are used to grief.
Yeah.
Particularly, I think with Alex's character, as far as grief goes.
Yeah, well, we start off with Kara grieving Mon-El, because Mon-El, last we saw, had to be shipped off of Earth because his parents ruined it for everyone.
And they were, okay, so another thing that I realized going back through and thinking about this, so, like, the reason Mon-El had to leave, and I don't think we covered this, they saturated the atmosphere with lead.
Yes.
Because that's what would get rid of the Daxamites, but the sacrifice was Mon-El had to go too.
Right. So Daxamites, just like Kryptonians are allergic to kryptonite, Daxamites are allergic to lead. I know. But they saturate, well, Lena figures out how to saturate the atmosphere with lead. So they all have to leave, but that means that they also have to ship Mon-El off in a pod. And the last we saw of him in season 2 is that his pod gets sucked into a wormhole. That's the end. And so we could start this season with Kara really dealing with a lot of denial in her grief. Like, she sort of buries herself in being Supergirl. She even, like, quits her job at Catco so she can focus on being Supergirl. And so there's a lot. She, starts pushing people away because she's convinced that if she allows herself to be human, then all of these emotions are going to come crashing down on her and she won't be able to do her job. I thought this was a really compelling storyline. for Kara. Like this idea of like because she's not human, right? She's Kryptonian, and so this idea of her like having to deal with having being raised human and then having all these human emotions and then like dealing with grief in a way that I don't think she'd had to deal with it before. And so she decides to deal with it by just ignoring it, which as we know from pop culture is a great way to deal with grief.
I mean, most people drink, so unfortunately. Yeah, this season really does focus on that. Kara's really losing her first real relationship. Like, real, amazing relationship that I shipped super hard. Yeah.
And so is Alex.
Yeah, and that's... The Alex breakup was really... Oh, that was heart-wrenching because of how much sense it made, but also how frustrating it was. Like, no one did anything wrong.
Right. And they really love each other. Like there's no like nobody wins, nobody's like the bad guy. Like they both love each other. This is a PSA for all you all who are dating or looking for your significant other. Have the kids conversation early. Like I know it seems like it's a serious thing that you shouldn't bring up early in a relationship, but it's better than finding out later on that you want to have kids and somebody else does not want to have kids, which is basically what happens.
It's not a first date question.
No, I mean,
maybe save it for like the fifth date.
Yeah, don't like bring it up immediately, but like don't wait until you're engaged to have this conversation.
Okay. Let me explain the best way to bring it up.
Okay.
And all right, I'm ready.
And this is something you can do on a first date. All right. Let's assume that you are, at a public place. Please, if you don't know the person, all first dates should be at a public place. And all you have to do, people who are listening, is there will be a child there. Point to that child and call that child an asshole. See how they react. All right, just like
you certainly know how to weed them out, don't you?
Yeah.
That was something I got very good at.
Gotcha.
Very good at.
Gotcha.
Anyway.
But yeah, so I mean, it's really heartbreaking because like you said, both of them have legitimate reasons to be the way that they are, to think the way that they do, but they really love each other, and we as audience really love them together. I don't know if anyone was actively rooting for them to break up. If you were, you don't have a heart. But yeah, so we get to see both of them lose their relationships and deal with that grief in different ways.
And that's not all.
Oh.
We also have John managing to reunite with his father, only to lose him by the end of the season as well. We had two Alias alums in the Arrowverse at the same time for a brief period this season of television. Because Lumley comes in to play John's dad, and right before Victor Garber checks out.
Yeah, I really liked the excursion to Mars.
Yeah.
Did you guys like those? That it was like an episode, right?
It wasn't rain, so it was great.
Man, it was good, and it was a really good portrayal of what the White Martians did, I think. Because his father's like, you're not my son, you're just a ghost, you're just them playing head games again.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really good. Yeah. I think this is dealing with something that people who are watching this, people of our generation, are going to have to start kind of realizing that our parents are mortal beings if they haven't had to deal with that already. So this kind of hit close to home for me.
Yeah, and I think it was made more sad by the fact that there was so much missing time, right? Like this idea that he thought his father was dead, his father was being held captive by the White Martians on Mars. And so like this idea that like there were all these years that they didn't get to have together, that they were sort of cheated out of. And so, yeah, and then he finally gets him back. They move into an apartment on Earth, and so it's sort of like the odd couple for a little bit. But then he does end up sacrificing himself in the final. Is it in the finale? That he sacrifices himself? After passing on all his wisdom to Jean.
Yes.
That telepathy is really useful. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sadness, a lot of grief being processed, I think, in this season.
Yeah. So in case that wasn't enough, in case the Kryptonian subplot, the return of Mon-El, and all the loss that happens in the season, don't forget, James is also a vigilante now.
Yeah.
So that's super fun.
Yeah.
And not necessary at all. But it's what we're doing.
Yeah, overall, I think that this is really just a season that's kind of there. Like, it definitely isn't bad, but it doesn't feel like a full season. It feels like a lot of individual strong episodes that aren't really connected, I guess, if that makes sense.
Now,
of course, so, the thing that it just mentioned is that, we talked about how Mon-El left at the end of season 2. He comes back in season 3 with some folks with him, and that becomes a season-long arc. But it's like, 400 years from now, they'll figure out how to get rid of the lead. So that's why we can come back now. And, it's great because we get Brainy. We end up getting rid of Wynn via this mechanism of Mon-El coming back from the future. And we get to play it for more drama, but it's like we had the tearful goodbye in season 2, and this goodbye is not going to be as much of an impact.
Well, it's really hard to get over the loss of your boyfriend when he comes back having aged 7 years when it's only been 7 months for you, and he has a wife. That's always weird.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we get a
12th level intellect best friend.
And a 12th level intellect. Yeah, so I mean, there is time travel this season. Honestly, I thought that was kind of the weaker part of the season too. Not the Mon-El interpersonal stuff, just like because of the way that time travel is used in this show, I always get a little on edge whenever they bring it back up. And so that was kind of interesting, like this sort of like they know the future, but they can't tell her the future. But like it turns out Imra is there for a different reason than Mon-El is, and so that got a little confusing after a while. I will say, standout guest star though, Laurie Metcalf. Do you guys remember her guest star this season?
I remember she was in it, but
yeah,
she was a pretty normal person, right?
So she's in the episode "Shot Through the Heart," which is about
yes, she's Wynn's mom.
She's Wynn's mom, yeah. So she comes back because Wynn's dad dies in prison. And for those of you who don't remember, Wynn's dad is a supervillain.
Toymaker, I think.
The Toymaker, yeah. He was dealt with in season 1 of Supergirl. So his dad dies in prison, and this prompts his mom to suddenly make a reappearance after having disappeared for all these years. And so the episode is kind of a beautifully done episode where Wynn is trying to process like being abandoned by his mom, but then he finds out that his mom was actually like pretty horribly abused by his father. And so there's a lot of these extenuating circumstances. And I think Laurie Metcalf does and there's like a copycat out there, Toymaker, and so that throws this fun little wrench into it. Laurie Metcalf, I think, does a really good job of balancing, like in all of her stuff. I mean, she's just fantastic. But she does a really good job of balancing those two things, like being the person who abandoned her son, but also the person who was escaping abuse. And so I will say, like, as far as like guest stars go, I distinctly remember that one standing out to me.
Yeah. Overall, I really think, because I'm going to want to talk a lot more about Legends of Tomorrow Season 3, that we should probably just leave this and jump into it. Where would you guys put this on the Supergirl's seasons that we've covered?
Is it better than 2?
No.
You think 2's the best?
Yeah.
So far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it better than 1?
Yeah, I think the only other thing really to say about this season is, well, first of all, because I love the casting stuff. Laura Benanti does not play Supergirl's mom. As part of the plot, Kara and Mon-El go into space and accidentally find Argo City,
Oh yeah.
which is where the Kryptonians, some of the Kryptonians, including her mom, managed to get to. Laura Benanti, who played her mom in the first season, is no longer available, so they recast her with Erica Durance, who was who played Supergirl. Who was Supergirl, right, on Smallville? Yes. But so we find out her mom's still alive. But the other thing to mention about this season, because it sets up season 4, is that Rain and friends want to terraform Earth to make new Krypton, and that's definitely going to set up the problems of season 4, because we begin season 4 with, you can't trust those aliens. They're just going to eventually try to destroy us.
Yeah, so I think it is, that's a good point to mention that at this point, all of the season villains have been aliens, and we mentioned how sometimes that can be a little bothersome, but it does set up this sort of anti-alien sentiment that starts sort of ramping up in season 4.
And that's honestly the best part about season 3, that it sets up season 4.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's all about the characters this season, not as much about what actually happens.
Yeah. All right, guys. Season 3 of Legends of Tomorrow.
Yes.
Bebos of Tomorrow.
Bebos of Tomorrow.
We will discuss Bebo in just a little bit, but let's go over how this season begins, where the timeline is broken and we're kind of just sitting around and time is terrible, and Rip Hunter shows up as like, you guys screwed up, I'm taking care of this, goodbye, leave, and they decide to not obey directions like the Legends always do.
After a time jump, they stop for 6 months, and then they're like, fuck this, we're Legends. We broke it, we'll fix it.
Yes, we're revolutionizing the human race by swiping up instead of swiping left. If it's not on your phone, it's not innovation.
Yeah, okay, so I love the Legends. I mean, besides the problems of season 1, which season 1 was not a great season, but it wasn't a terrible season either. I will say that, like, this season, I think, made the most sense in terms of how it started, because breaking time, while it sounded terrible at the end of last season, actually allows them to just do some bananas things this season. Just, like, they don't have to follow the rules anymore, because the whole point of this season is that they're hunting down time anachronisms. So you get, like, these crazy things like saber-toothed tigers in the circus, and aliens in 1988, and like, you just get these like crazy Helen of Troy in old Hollywood, and so it's like, it gets to be like, they don't have to worry as much about historical accuracy or historical context, and they can just focus on the best part of Legends, which is everything's fucked up and we're having a lot of fun.
Let's talk a little bit about like the freak show, the episode where the P.T. Barnum, played by Billy Zane, and they make a reference to Titanic in that episode, and you have Victor Garber and Billy Zane in there.
And also they made an episode that actually reveals P.T. Barnum to be a terrible human being, which I feel like most people knew before they saw The Greatest Showman.
I mean, I certainly did. You can kind of guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, we start out... Also, I still love the name of the first episode of the season is Arubicon, because they were in Aruba. But then you have Julius Caesar, so it's the Rubicon.
Yes, Julius Caesar is in Aruba. Gets captured by Mick. But then we also introduce the Time Bureau, which Rip creates to... So Rip is now not with the Legends, but he creates the Time Bureau to fix time.
They're the Men in Black.
Yeah.
But men in, like, what is it, Sears business suits. Like there's definitely the Legends definitely knock them for their attire. They're like knockoff Men in Black.
And we meet two very important members of the Time Bureau in the first episode. The first important member, of course, is Ava Sharp, who is clearly the only competent person in the Time Bureau.
What about Gary?
And we learn. Well, that's what I was going to say. 2 is Gary.
Becomes
Gary.
the most important member of the Legends.
Yeah. Gary is so important.
He's amazingly competent. He just doesn't know.
It's important also to know that in this season, Gary does in fact have both of his original nipples. So
yeah, that is a plot point.
That will come up later.
He does have both of his original nipples here. But yeah, Ava Sharp. I mean, I like Ava Sharp as a character. She's kind of like introduced at the very beginning as being sort of like the uptight rules follower member of the Bureau. Like she and Sarah clash literally in the first episode, but then there's also this like great chemistry between them, which they of course sort of play up in that first episode, because they're very evenly matched, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Also, just like, I really want to bring up a few things that you guys might not have known. There's an episode where they handle a vampire in Victorian England, right, in London.
Yes.
So Dominic Purcell is actually reading Dracula throughout the episode, and he played Dracula in the third Blade movie.
Really?
Yep, didn't know that.
I did not know that Dominic Purcell played Dracula.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Blade 2 or 3. I really
well,
need to get on.
Yeah, you're missing out.
I'm clearly in the wrong here.
There's just so many little nods like that if you're a nerd, like, this appeals to you so much. This show is just rife with stuff like that.
Well, and we get that, like, the episode Helen Hunt, which...
It's called Helen Hunt.
Yeah. The anachronism is that Helen of Troy is
Mm-hmm.
transferred to 1937, but it also functions as, like, this really cool educational episode about Hedy Lamarr and, like, her scientific exploits, because most people just know her as, like, this movie star from the 1930s, but, like, she actually invented a lot of things, which not a lot of people know. And so you get, like, these really cool little, like, vignettes. Like, the Legends is really good when it's like, did you know that this happened? Plus we get to see what would happen if Helen of Troy was actually taught to fight by Amazons, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, this season does really well with I mean, they just go for all the jokes and the episode titles. I mean, there's a run where you have No Country for Old Dads, Necromancing the Stone, I, Ava, The Good, the Bad, and the Cuddly. But the best episode title in the entire Arrowverse is, of course, guest starring John Noble.
I forgot about that too, actually, until I reread this.
And the best part about that episode is, yes, John Noble is the voice of Malice. Whatever. But so you've got this whole joke about guest starring John Noble. That's an episode where Gorilla Grodd tries to kill Barack Obama.
Like, I mean, we should talk about, like, the season-long arc, but again, this is a show that, even more than Supergirl, and even more successfully than Supergirl, really lives and dies by just, like, it's bonkers fun. Like, just, like, we're gonna do stuff with the characters, and it's gonna be crazy, and you're gonna enjoy the hell out of it.
We get Damien Dark for a third time in the Arrowverse.
Yeah.
And it's actually... And you think, okay, the first time was good on Arrow. The second time on Legends was so-so. We're going downhill here, but nope, there's actually more to do with his character.
Yeah.
Him and his crazy daughter who has been, I'm looking for the word here,
possessed by a demon.
Thank you. Possessed by a
Nora,
demon.
we get Nora Dark.
Yes.
Who plays Nora Dark? I know her name, and now I'm suddenly blanking.
Well, that's because you're a bad person who doesn't remember the names of actresses.
Well, I couldn't remember the word exorcism, so it's Courtney Ford.
Courtney Ford, yeah. I've been a fan of Courtney Ford, even though I couldn't remember her name temporarily. For a while. She's been on shows she's been on everything, but she was on Supernatural, and she was on an episode of How I Met Your Mother, and she's been on a lot, but I've always really enjoyed her when she's on things. I think Nora Dark is great. I think she's a good villain. She's a good conflicted villain, and she's a great ally later on.
Yeah,
so
this is a season where I'm not really sure how important the overarching storyline is, but basically this season is all about catching Malice, an escaped demon, and that's eventually how we'll get Constantine in, because Constantine's going to be there to help.
Okay, did either of you also lose your shit when Constantine showed up halfway through this?
Absolutely.
Oh my god. Okay, so Constantine, the history is that Constantine is a character from the DC Comics. He's a much darker character than I think anybody we've been introduced to in the Arrowverse so far. Is that a accurate statement?
He's a character who's always willing to take the morally questionable deal. And he's also a character who handles everything later. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I think the ABC Constantine is probably one of the best, most underrated network television shows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the whole premise of his character in the comics, and then this version of the character from ABC to this Arrowverse, is that he deals in dark magic, and that his soul is sort of mortgaged off. And so he deals with fighting demons and fighting the power of hell and saving people and doing exorcisms and all that stuff, which is some pretty dark material for a lot of it. We have seen him before in the Arrowverse. He was briefly introduced in an episode of Arrow, you all remember. But he had his own show before this, as Andy mentioned, on ABC. It was canceled. People hated it. They didn't hate the show. They hated the cancellation of the show because Constantine is such a beloved character. And like you said, it was a pretty well-received show. And so people were so excited to see him on Arrow, and it's the same actor. And so it was really, really cool when we got to see him be in Legends for a longer role than just an episode.
And it's
with this one, he's only there an episode or now, here or there.
But it was still more than one episode, though.
The thing that's nice about his introduction happens right after the crossover. Stein has died, and so in that episode, we actually get young Stein, doing a riff on the whole trying to buy the toy at Christmas. The toy is a Bebo,
a Furby,
a small furry Furby, terrible nightmare of a thing. And so young Martin Stein with the last Bebo gets zapped back to the Vikings, and the aberration here is that they begin to worship the Bebo, who and so Christmas Day is now Bebo Day. So it's funny because in this episode where we're still, as the audience and the legends as themselves, grieving Stein's death, we run into young Stein. Jax tries to Back to the Future young Stein by giving him a letter to open, which Stein refuses to do. This is basically also the exigence for Jax leaving, so we have another loss. It's very, very sad. What do? They introduce Constantine to make you feel better.
Yeah.
Which classically Constantine makes things better. If I read that character correctly.
That might be the only time Constantine has ever made things better. But yeah, Constantine shows up and basically says, he's the one who tells them about Malice. That's the other joke this season, is that they keep calling him by different versions of the name. Well, wait, what is it they call him for most of it? Is it Malice? And then later when the demon actually is released, he's like, the name is Malice! You guys have been mispronouncing it the whole season.
We should talk about the other new Legends character, Zari.
Zari, yes.
Oh, Zari. I like Zari. Zari's great.
Yeah.
She's a metahuman, right?
Yeah.
And she is,
And she's Muslim.
Yes.
Which plays very much into her story coming from a time where the United States and Canada kind of took Muslims and put them in concentration camps.
Yeah, so it turns out Argus finally did the thing that we all knew Argus would do eventually in the future as a shadowy government organization, and instituted military law and decided to throw anyone who they thought was a threat, metahumans, Muslims, anyone who's seen as a threat to national security, into camps, basically. And so the legends, when they go forward to the future and they meet Zari. She's trying to free her brother from one of these camps, and they end up finding out that her brother is dead, but she receives his totem, which allows her to control wind. The totem is the least interesting part of Zari as a character, but she's like brilliant. She's a hacktivist. She is hilarious. She's a nerd, which is great. And she has one of the best episodes this season, the Groundhog Day episode, where she has to basically repeat the same. It's like a 2-hour period or something like that, where she has to keep living the same period of time over and over again, trying to stop a bomb that goes off that destroys the Wave Rider. So it's kind of a bottle episode in that way.
So by the way, I've said this to Tessa. I said after Here I Go Again, which basically the Groundhog Day episode, you see the legends coming back from a mission where they had to dress up like ABBA.
Oh yeah.
And Mick is dressed up as Napoleon. There's an entire Waterloo joke going on here in the whole episode. And I said to Tessa after we watched that episode that I really hoped in a future season we would see the Waterloo episode. Like this mission. I want this mission. And season 4, we don't see it, but we see there's another reference to this mission. And so at that point, I said to Tessa, if the last episode of Legends is not the ABBA episode, like it's a gag now, it has to be the series finale. We finally get to see the mission itself. If not, I'm going to be very upset. But this is it's so much fun. That one of the best gags of the season you don't even get to see.
Yeah, it's just there in the background almost. But yeah, we also learn all sorts of things because she has to live these hours over and over again. You know, she goes through all the usual stages of movies like Groundhog Day or Happy Death Day, or where she goes through all these okay, I can fix things. Oh no, I can't fix things. Oh, I guess I can fix things. And so we end up finding all these things out also about the other characters. Like, we find out that Nate and Amaya are back together. We found out that Mick is writing a romance novel, and it's actually pretty good. So it's a really great episode because it has a gag that I think works pretty well. It's a pretty fun gag, the whole Groundhog Day thing. But it also moves all the characters along a little bit, even though we're looking at them through the lens of this new character.
Yeah, and at the end of that episode, we also find out. So right after the crossover to Rip ends up going AWOL from the Time Bureau and ends up with no other place to go, having alienated the Time Bureau and the Legends, finds Wally West because he's in this season of Legends as well.
Yep. Kid Flash! Yeah, I mean, he's only in, the last half of the season, but it's a fun last half of the season. Get to have some speedster fun.
I mean, I feel like, as we're describing all the different things from this season, I feel like if you hadn't watched this, you'd be getting the impression that this season's a mess. And it is very much a mess. We haven't even gotten into the fact that Ava is...
a clone.
Yeah,
from
she's
the future.
A clone from the future. We haven't even gotten into that yet.
Okay, I get the whole Ava pun thing, but she's not a robot. Ava sounds like she's a robot, but she's a clone. But she and Sarah get together this season, and it's a pretty good ship, I think. Mm-hmm.
It's a healthy relationship.
It's a healthy relationship. After Nyssa, that was definitely not a healthy relationship. after Oliver, also not a healthy relationship.
Alex.
She has a one-night stand with Alex, which is great, but also not a relationship.
Constantine,
one-night stand with Constantine, which was fun, but, like, again, nobody needs to be involved with Constantine. You end up dying when that happens.
And going to hell. You die and you go to hell.
Yeah, there's no middle ground with Constantine. So, it's really nice to see, and I think this is directly because of her relationship with Alex, because Alex convinces her, like, that it's good to start looking again. It's good to, like, value yourself in your relationships and not just, seek out whatever's easiest. She then decides to be in a relationship with Ava, and they have, like, the fun little hijinks, right? Like, where they try to go on a date, but the date keeps getting interrupted and, like, all of that stuff. But I think that Ava and Sarah really work as a couple. Yeah. And, of course, the other gag this season is that they have to collect all of the totems, I guess.
Yeah, so they can make
magic
Voltron.
Stones.
Yes.
So they can make Voltron. That was... Okay. So this season, I kept thinking this will never work for an entire season. Like, the next episode is going to be terrible. And then somehow the next episode would only get better. But yeah, the season finale is so weird and so wonderful at the same time.
It's a kaiju battle, right? That's
Yeah.
what you guys like, right? Like,
Yeah.
I got my Voltron references, you got your kaiju battle, we're all happy here.
We got to hear Mick say, "Are we making a baby?" when they make the thing, and then he says "worst orgy ever" afterwards.
And that's and the return of Jonah Hex.
Yeah, Jonah Hex is in the final. They get to fight pirates, Vikings, and Romans all at the same time. And they make a giant Bebo to fight Malice or Malice or whatever. Oh my god!
I just want to go over why John Noble is important, because it's one of the funniest things. Like, I love meta stuff, so metatextual stuff really works for me. And Malice, as a disembodied voice, a demonic entity, is actually voiced by John Noble. And the legends go, he sounds a lot like John Noble from Lord of the Rings. And they go to kidnap John Noble so they can make him read a line, and some people will think it's from Malice.
And they kidnap him from his trailer on the set of Lord of the Rings. Like, he's in his Lord of the Rings costume.
Yeah, his Lord Denethor costume.
Yeah, I just think that with the other shows, sometimes the writers get too bogged down in, like, the mythologies of the characters, and, like, oh, who is the Flash, and, like, who is he fighting, and what does this mean, or, Oliver's got to brood all the time and keep secrets from everybody. This is a show that I think the writers just let themselves go. They let themselves make all the jokes and do all the bits and have fun with these characters, and I just...
Right.
It's like eating candy. Like, it's just so
There's
good.
an E.T. episode this season.
Oh, that's right.
With young Ray.
We see Ray as a child. And which Stranger Things ripped off. Right? Season 2 of Stranger Things involves Dustin having a little cuddly monster.
Well, that's also supposed to be an E.T.
I know, right?
Yeah. They both rip off E.T.
Yes.
You're like,
But you're also able to have serious character moments, like in the Vietnam episode where Mick meets his father. A man he goes on to kill because he abuses him. Like...
Right, and there's a lot of subtext there about PTSD, which Patrick Stewart has talked a lot about, like, because his Patrick Stewart's mother was abused by his father, and he talks a lot about, like, how it's only in recent years that he realized how unstable his father was after fighting in World War II, and, like, how the PTSD was its own form of, like, madness. And so I think that this was a really interesting way for them to say, like, no, obviously abuse is terrible, but, like, here's where, like, a lot of soldiers are coming from when they come back home, especially from a war like Vietnam. So it was such a... I can't even, like...
Well, and we found out from that episode, too, that the amount of time that they go into investing into Mick's character, season 3 is where we really learn that this show is about Sarah and Mick. Like, they are the two central characters. Everybody else could be a revolving door. I kind of think that maybe Zari is going to be a permanent addition.
We'll see what happens this next season.
Right, but the show is Sarah and Mick, and they do the work with Mick to establish that. Sarah's always been kind of the main character, really, I think.
They have just these also great moments where if you didn't know these characters, you wouldn't realize how much they care about each other, and both the actors play it so well. There's a scene in the finale, because there's a scene earlier, or there's an episode earlier on in the season where one of the totems is like the death totem, and Sarah wears it, and it turns her into this like crazy psychotic killer, and she like threatens everyone on the ship. But then in the final episode, she has to put the death totem back on, basically, in order to create the Bebo kaiju. I don't even know what else to call it. And there's just this line where because she's so nervous about putting it back on because she knows that it could make her into this terrible monster, and she looks at Mick for reassurance, and Mick says, and again, if you weren't like paying attention, this could just be like Mick being a terrible person, but he looks back at her and he says, if you turn into a witch bitch, don't worry, I'll kill you. And like, it's just like once you realize that it's those two characters, and they're such messed up characters in some ways, but that's how they like communicate their affection for each other, right? That they're not going to let each other become worse than they already are. I don't know. Mick and Sarah BFFs forever. They're just awesome.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much about this show specifically. Please, everyone, run out to Netflix if you haven't seen it. Like, you can start at season 2, but at least start at season 3. This show is just a beautiful, beautiful ride.
And it only gets better.
It gets arguably better.
This is not even the peak of Legends. Like, that's what's crazy about this season. It's so good, and it's not even the best.
Yeah. I mean, there's no Firestorm in season 4, and Amaya does leave.
Yeah,
Amaya
does leave.
At the end of season 3. But season 3 also heralds the re-return of Constantine.
Season 4, you mean?
Season 3.
This is season
3.
Right, the end of season 3.
Oh, the end of season 3.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about how the last scene of season 3, which made me so happy.
It's a callback to the beginning of the first scene, where Mick is lying on the beach, except this time everybody's on the beach with him. And instead of Julius Caesar stepping into his light, it's Gary, dressed as Constantine. And Constantine's behind him.
I'm also very happy that they made the decision. I mean, and again, knowing Greg Berlanti and crew, this is not a decision that should have surprised anyone. But they made the decision where John Constantine is bi, like he is in the comics. So he definitely sleeps with Gary this season.
Who still has both of his original nipples.
Original nipples.
But the big thing is Constantine pulls out a dragon's head, throws it down, and is like, you guys messed up.
Malice is not the only demon that got out.
Is this how every Legends season is going to end?
I want it to.
You guys
Pretty
fucked
much.
it up more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, and yeah, like you said, Amaya leaves, and also we do get to see Jax really briefly in the last episode, which was kind of nice because when we saw him last,
he's a totem operator, isn't he?
No, he just comes because to help them. Like they send out a beacon and he comes and helps them out, and he's powerless now. He's not Firestorm anymore.
Is he confirmed for Crisis?
I don't know.
Do you know if we'll see him again?
Do we know if Jax is coming back?
I can't see why not. Like, I don't know. I mean, if you're getting the Titans from the DC Universe streaming service, anything's on board. And
well, why not Jax?
Yeah,
But I really liked it because last time we saw him, he was so sad, right? Like he leaves, and it's because his best friend / father figure has died, and he has to figure out who he is. Apart from the Legends. And so it was just really nice to have him back in a few scenes and to know that it's been 5 years for him, right? Because time travel and all that stuff. And he's married and he has a kid, and it's just a really nice cap on that character to know that he's okay.
So thanks to the trusty Google, 3 days ago, Guggenheim was asked about the possibility of Garber, so Stein, or Jax, or Bebo returning for Crisis. And he confirmed that one of the three will be returning for Crisis.
It's Bebo, isn't it?
I mean, as much as I want it to be Jax.
Yeah. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, please see it. It's awesome. And season 4, we'll talk about season 4, and I'm so excited to do that too.
Yeah.
Season 3 of Legends is clearly the best so
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah. Of Legends, again, Legends is one of the ones where one is kind of shaky because of the villain. It's still fun, but it's shaky.
It's also shaky because of the barista.
That's true, and Hawk Girl, which they make a joke about this season too. But it is one of the shows where it gets better. Like most shows peak really early. This one just keeps getting better and better.
Agreed. All right, guys, I think that'll wrap it up. Can you tell the people where to find you online?
I am on Twitter at Swayla Tessa. Swayla spelled SWEHLA.
I'm on Twitter at Sam_Morris9.
Yeah. And you can find me on Twitter at Hebrews Pale Ale. You can find the podcast on Twitter also at geek101podcast.com. That's all we have for today. Class dismissed.